Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 o'clock, so we will get started. We are very pleased to welcome you to this ESPC campaign webinar series event. My name is Laura Carpenter, and I'm with the Office of State and Community Energy Programs here at the Department of Energy, and I'll be moderating today's session. We're looking forward to having a great discussion today on how public entities can leverage and maximize the impact of funding and incentives, including those stemming from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, to create more impactful projects through energy savings performance contracts. Before we dive in, I want to quickly cover a few housekeeping items. All of you tuning in should be automatically placed in listen-only mode with your video off. Please submit any questions you may have throughout today's session using the Q&A feature. This webinar is also being recorded, and the recording and slides will be posted on the ESPC campaign website once they are available following today's event. As I just noted, today's webinar is part of a series being offered by the Department of Energy's ESPC campaign. For those of you who are tuning in who may not be familiar with this program, there's a brief overview of the program and what it has to offer on this slide. The ESPC campaign is a national initiative that engages states, local governments, schools, universities, hospitals, and other market stakeholders to support, expand, and enhance the use of energy savings performance contracts to achieve significant energy, environmental, and cost savings across the non-federal public sector. Through this program, partners can access resources and technical assistance from DOE, as well as peer exchange opportunities to share and demonstrate best practice approaches for ESPC programs and projects, with the goal of collectively achieving $1 billion in measured and verified energy and cost savings by 2030. For more information about the program and to sign up, please visit the ESPC campaign website, which is accessible through the QR code on this slide. We are very excited to have a great lineup of speakers joining us today. In the order of their presentations, we first have Dr. Timothy Unruh, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of Energy Service Companies, or NAESCO. NAESCO conducts advocacy as well as provides accreditation for the energy service company industry. Prior to his current role, Tim led the implementation of energy savings projects within the government and private sectors, followed by a stint in the federal government, where he held several leadership positions in the Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. Next, you will hear from Doug Gagne, who is a project analyst at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL. At NREL, Doug performs techno-economic analyses to identify what mix of generation technologies will most cost-effectively meet a site's power needs. He also evaluates early-stage project development considerations for renewable energy and resilience projects. Our third presenter is Aldo Mazzaferro, the Executive Director of Business Development for NV5's Clean Energy Group. Aldo has served as an owner's representative and independent third-party consultant on behalf of federal, state, and local government agencies around the country, in which capacity he helps clients plan for and achieve their goals by overseeing their performance-based energy projects. And then bringing us home, we have Ben Taube, a Senior Vice President of Bank of America Public Capital Corp's Energy Services team. In his role, Ben is responsible for structuring financial solutions for credit-based public sector energy efficiency, renewable energy, and energy-related equipment transactions, working directly with issuers and borrowers from the government, non-for-profit and healthcare sectors, as well as energy equipment manufacturers, utilities, and energy service companies. We will reserve some time for questions at the end, so please don't hesitate to drop your questions in the Q&A box as they come to you throughout our speakers' presentations. And without further ado, I will stop sharing my slides and turn it over to Tim to give us an introduction to ESPC. Tim, take it away.
Okay, now I figured it all out. Let's see here.
There's a share video at the top of your banner.
Well, that's nice. Let's see if we can get rid of that. How about that? But it doesn't
I
appear
don't
that I
see
have
you, I see your slides.
I know I have no ability to turn the camera on while I'm sharing. Okay. All right, we're on. Whew.
All right,
Love
excellent.
that WebEx. Whew. Well, it's great to be here today, and it's wonderful to be presenting for you, Laura. I know we've had you present at some of our events, and I'm especially honored to be able to present with all the presenters today, our NASCO members. It's great to have you all here. And so I'll just get right into it so we can have some plenty of time for all of our other presenters to talk to us today. So an ESPC primer, I think that most people on the call know what an ESPC is, but just in case we have a few new people to it, it is the original public-private partnership contract. It's existed since 1982. It is supported across the entire country and the federal government and territories as well, in that we have laws in place. There's tools that are available to help you do ESPCs that are supported by so many organizations all over the Department of Energy. GSA and others have many tools to help support how we do ESPCs to ensure that we have quality projects. And there's model contract documents available from Department of Energy through Lawrence Berkeley National Labs and through the Energy Services Coalition. And so in a nutshell, performance contracting provides a service where you can have renovations to your building, and those renovations are paid for through the savings that you achieve through the renovation itself. Those savings are paid off through the life of a loan that's taken out to pay for the retrofits, and it basically pays the note. The key thing about a performance contract is that it's guaranteed by the energy service company to ensure that the savings occur. There's key terms in this. There's the contractor. We call those contractors ESCOs, energy service companies. We've got over 50 companies that we know of that do energy savings performance contracts across the United States. They're represented in the U.S. by the National Association of Energy Service Companies, but there's a worldwide recognition of ESCOs. We're a part of what's called the Global ESCO Network that recognizes ESCO associations throughout the entire world. U.S. ESCOs can get accredited through NASCO to be an accredited energy service provider or an energy efficiency contractor or an ESCO themselves. And many states and governments have approved ESCO lists that they use. The methodology, of course, as I mentioned, is the building renovations are paid through savings and the savings are guaranteed. So what makes an ESPC? I think of it as having three primary components. Other methods of contracting have some of these components, but performance contracting has all three of these. The first component is there's a procurement methodology that's somewhat unique, and that uniqueness allows for a selection that's most likely based on qualifications rather than a scope of work. An ESCO is selected before there is a scope of work known, and because of that selection that happens early, we don't know what the scope will be, so you can't necessarily go do a bid price. There is pricing components included in the overall pricing structure in most places, but the main procurement methodology is through a qualification selection. The next piece is an investment grade audit. The investment grade audit is different than just the energy audit you buy from an engineering firm. The investment grade audit includes firm fixed prices that you will be guaranteed this is what the project will cost, and it will include a guaranteed savings that says these are the savings that we're willing to guarantee for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever the term may be. And finally, there's a performance assurance. After the project is constructed, most contractors, they head out and there's a 1-year warranty and that's all you get. Performance contracting, however, has a long-term relationship that you establish with them and they help you through the project, fix problems, guarantee savings, may perform other operation and maintenance services through the life of the contract. So reasons to do a performance contract, the ESCO will focus on meeting your goals. And this is a unique case. This isn't just a case where a contractor comes in and says, here's the scope of work, this is all we're going to do. The ESCO comes in and asks you, what are you wanting to do? Are you trying to decarbonize? Do you have goals you need to meet? Are there certain brands of equipment you've had good luck with? Certain contractors you've had good luck with? Tell us so that we can make sure we shape the project so that it can be the best it can be to meet your needs. It is a collaborative process, an integrated design approach that results in the best project that the ESCO can deliver and that what the client wants. So managing the risk of a construction project is also a big piece of it. You have one point of contact from clear at the beginning before there's a scope of work, when you have a twinkle in your eye of what you want to do, all the way to the end when the project is finally completed after 10, 15, 20 years. And that managing of the risk is very important because you have one contact, there's nobody to blame. Change orders are challenging because you now have a set scope of work and the contractor has developed that scope of work. And so any change orders are on the contractor to cover, not the owner. Many other reasons you can accomplish deferred maintenance. If you're in a K through 12 school, for example, I know I heard the Renew America School Grant just got released today. So if you're in a K through 12 school, you probably have a lot of deferred maintenance. ESCOs can come in and help you accomplish that deferred maintenance. You can improve the indoor environment from lighting to air quality. You can make your service contracts align to current needs. So in other words, if you've got 10 different service contracts, the energy service company can combine those into one contract to lower the amount of management you have. You can get building occupants involved. For K through 12 schools, this is a great one. It can be part of the educational piece. You can have a improved pace of project completion. You have fewer steps. You don't have to do a design and bid that out and then go bid out a project and then come back and manage a project. It's all done at one time in one selection. And the key point, again, as I started out with, is that joint scope development. The ESCO works with you to develop the scope. I'm going to be kind of quick on this slide. This is how we energize our ESPC. And this is through something that we've really seen happen a lot lately, is leveraging any money you have with a performance contract. And I'm not going to go over the little example in the blue box because Aldo has a much clearer example he's going to give us that will detail how this leveraging works and how we get more money. But in a nutshell, this is a paper written by John Schonder, long been a supporter of the ESPC industries from his time at Oak Ridge. He worked at an ESCO and now he's back at Oak Ridge. Wrote this paper, and it shows that if you've got a performance contracting project, that's the first blue cylinder, and you've got a little bit of capital, that's the yellow cylinder. If you combine them together, the bonus you get is the green cylinder, meaning that you get more than just the capital plus the performance contract, you get a little bit extra. In today's world, the yellow cylinder can be very large because there's so many opportunities. And we're going to hear about some of those from our man from NREL, who's going to tell us about all the different ways that we can see these tax credits that can support public entities and provide that money and make that yellow piece get larger. When the yellow piece gets larger, the green piece grows proportionally larger as well. And so with that, I'm going to try to end a little early and give our next speaker just a little bit more time.
Well, thanks, Tim. Thanks for that great overview of to kind of level set us and tell us about what ESPC is and what benefits it brings to the table. And so next we have Doug, who's going to provide an overview of the federal and other funding and incentive opportunities that are out there for public entities to utilize.
Great. Yeah.
Doug, take it away.
Thank you very much, Tim and Laura. So yeah, I will be covering a variety of funding and financing incentive opportunities today. Just a quick note that although I'll be talking about some of the tax provisions in the IRA, that I am not a lawyer and you would not want me to be your lawyer. So although I'm familiar with these incentives, just be aware that you really should seek qualified tax counsel before pursuing any of them in detail. In this particular presentation, I'll be talking about some of the federal grants and tax incentives available for ESPC projects, as well as state, local, and utility resources that can be leveraged as well. A couple different types of funding and financing opportunities, and just to distinguish between these two concepts, when we talk about funding, we're talking about money that you don't have to pay back. This could be grants, this could be tax credits, this could be rebates or incentives from your utility. Whereas financing, those items shown at the top of that chart, loans or ESPCs, involve a repayment. So you're borrowing the money, but as Tim just very eloquently illustrated, these are not mutually exclusive concepts. When you combine funding with financing, you can get an even greater overall benefit where it's greater than the sum of its parts. I'll have a very quick overview of a whole bunch of different federal grant opportunities that have become available, either from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the Inflation Reduction Act, BIL or IRA, as they're sometimes referred to. Some that are particularly of note are the EECBG or the Renew America School Grant Program that Tim mentioned. I won't drain this slide as there's a lot of detailed content here, but this can be used as a resource as you're looking for specific federal grant application processes. Just be careful to really review the applicability of the grants and make sure that your project aligns with their mission, as some are competitive. The piece I want to focus most on today are really the tax credits available for a variety of renewable and clean energy technologies. This was established and extended in the Inflation Reduction Act and also expanded beyond its traditional reach. So historically, the investment tax credit, or ITC, has been a major engine of all renewable energy deployment, from residential scale all the way to big utility scale plants. But it's historically been a tax credit, which was either required that you had a very large tax bill, and if you were, say, a MUSH participant, you wouldn't be eligible for the ITC. You would have to partner with somebody else who could use that benefit and maybe get a lower PPA price in your deal. That has totally changed with the Inflation Reduction Act, which now establishes some additional ability to receive direct or elective payment of these tax credits in cash from the Department of Treasury with the filing. So governments and their instrumentalities are now elective pay eligible. So even if, say, a state university owns a solar facility, they can now take direct payment of the ITC that they would have otherwise foregone. There was also a significant expansion of the Section 179D tax deduction, which was previously $1.88 per square foot. It's now $5 per square foot, and it's also much easier to qualify for than in prior pre-IRA times. In addition to expanding the availability of the investment tax credit, the IRA also created some additional bonus adder programs that, when stacked, could result in a project that theoretically could be as much as 70% of the project's cost covered in these tax credits. More realistically, these probably, maybe you would qualify for one or two at a time, which is still very significant. The other thing I wanted to note here is that for most ESPC type projects involving solar, you'll most likely take the ITC, but that there is a production tax credit now available as well. Just to give you a quick overview, as I've been talking a lot about the benefit, but not what it applies to, the ITC is primarily available for renewable or zero emitting technologies. So that could include solar photovoltaics, wind energy, geothermal, combined heat and power for now, and a whole host of other technologies such as biomass. Energy storage has also become standalone eligible, where it was previously only eligible when paired with solar photovoltaics. So just so you're aware that these tax credits are primarily for generation technologies, not for energy efficiency upgrades. I want to dive a little bit deeper into elective pay so folks understand the benefits and requirements associated with it. Now, tax exempt, certain tax exempt and governmental, usually state governmental entities that don't pay income tax are still eligible for elective pay. The key point that I want to stress is that this occurs after the system is already operating. So although this is a substantial incentive for the project, bridge financing will be needed in the interim, i.e. that you couldn't plan on having this money to pay for the installation of the system, as the payment may not occur for 1 to 1.5 years after placement in service, depending on the timing of your filing. Also note that since you are a non-taxable entity, the very substantial depreciation benefits associated with these technologies are not available to you. You would have to kind of forego those, whereas if you had partnered with a third party, that third party might be able to use both the ITC and depreciation benefits in your project. And last, I want to note that there's kind of a couple of significant strings attached to qualifying for the full investment tax credit with elective pay. To get the full ITC benefit, you do need to meet prevailing wage requirements, basically payment in line with the Davis-Bacon wages, which are prevailing, and then also meet apprenticeship requirements that are outlined in some IRS guidance as well that I won't go into today. The other piece for elective pay eligibility is within the next couple of years, projects that are big, say over a megawatt of generation capacity, are also going to need to meet domestic content requirements. These are fairly onerous and specific to meet. So this is again where I would emphasize that tax council involvement, because you need to make sure that your project will be eligible and meet those documentation requirements to make sure you're in compliance with the elective pay requirements. This is just for reference, but the big takeaway is that most tax-exempt state governments and their subdivisions will be eligible for elective pay. So if these entities own a solar PV project under an ESPC, they would be able to claim that elective pay. Another incentive that was expanded that I mentioned before is 179D. A couple key, I've noted the benefits before, but a couple key considerations as you try to incorporate this into a performance contracting project are really that this is another one that does not come before project placed in service. So the system must be operating and audited by a certified auditor to verify the EUI improvements before you can actually claim that deduction, or your ESCO partner can claim that deduction in the project. There's a whole bunch of state, local, and utility resources to consider, more than I could list exhaustively, but I will list kind of in the right-hand column here some potential places to look. So check your state energy office, review your utility, talk to your utility representative. They often have many types of rebates for energy efficiency and renewable ECMs that they can help you with. Some will be prescribed, and some they will actually work with you to create custom incentives for you. Discuss with your ESCO whether your project might be eligible for demand response benefits. You could maybe have some of these assets, or have some of your controllable ECMs actually get you additional value in demand response. Some state and local governments will have grants available for improvements, particularly for specific entities. And also explore with your ESCO the possibility for low interest financing. Things like green bonds or use of green banks revolving loan funds to improve your financing rates. Utilities, if you work with them directly, may also have on-bill repayment structures that allow you to just pay a fixed premium on your bill as a part of the financing. And there's a couple other utility services that you may consider as well. Last, I want to just kind of summarize what I talked through very quickly. So big takeaways are that elective pay is a huge opportunity. Rather than having to rely on third-party owned structures like power purchase agreements, owners can actually own the assets directly and achieve a greater benefit to themselves financially within performance contracts without that third-party ownership. I already mentioned this, but just note that you do not get depreciation benefits, and there are some pretty significant requirements that you will need to meet to qualify for elective pay. It's not a given. Discuss 179D with your ESCO and determine whether that will be a good fit for your project. And the kind of the key thesis of a lot of what you'll be hearing today is really look to stack value and be creative, because every time you can stack in one of these federal, state, or utility incentives, you're getting that multiplier on the savings and the overall scope of your project. So with that, I have a couple useful resources that you can reference for these federal and state incentives, particularly emphasizing the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency as you try to get into the weeds. And with that, I'll pass it back to Laura, and happy to answer any questions at the end. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Doug. So next, I would like to turn it over to Aldo to walk us through what this looks like in terms of applying grants and incentives to an example project.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
So
There it is. Yep, looks good.
figured it out. All right. Well, thank you, Laura, for the introduction earlier and for having me here today. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I have the pleasure of walking you all through how these projects, how all these funds can be leveraged to make for more comprehensive projects, more impactful projects, to fund your capital needs, address your climate goals, things of that nature. So I'm going to walk you through an exercise that we go through on every single project, where you're basically selecting the scope. And by doing that, in each of these steps, I want to show you how additional funding sources can come in and how we worked with this customer to leverage those funding sources to address more and more capital needs that they had to get done, because that's really the nature of performance contracts, in that there is some X amount, some existing amount of low-hanging fruit that exists in your facilities. Bundling those energy conservation measures, or ECMs, with your capital needs, and these are things like roofs and windows and black and white gray boilers that are 50 years old and wrapped in asbestos, that are this is equipment that's at the end of its useful life that needs to get done. So the nature of performance contracts, generally as a rule of thumb, is they're developed to be self-funding, meaning all the low-hanging fruit in the project helps to fund the ongoing capital cost of the equipment. So in order to do that, you need to work under different types of constraints. And generally there's three categories of constraints in these projects. There's your technical aspects of the project, because your buildings do need to be heated and cooled. They need to be occupied. They need to be operated, right? So generally you can only find somewhere in the 30% range, somewhere up to 40% generally, of potential energy savings in your buildings. That is without closing it down and shuttering it and mothballing it. There are some projects where you can include solar and really start to spin that meter backwards, but general rule of thumb is somewhere in that 30% range of actual reductions. There's also financing conditions that can constrain your projects. Your fiscal chief financial officers may only want to finance it for 15 years or 18 years or 20 years. The loan market may only finance it for 20 years. In the federal market, they can only go up to 25 years in financing. So there's different constraints. There's interest rates that your particular public agency can get for the project, whether that's higher or lower, dictates how much capital you can build into the project. And then finally, there's legislative constraints. So in your particular agencies, in your particular states, you have an applicable ESPC statute, and it's across the board. Sometimes there's multiple statutes within a given state. And generally you want to understand what that statute is, what's allowed, what's not allowed, including things like escalation rates or escalating payments or capital contributions by the owner, energy related cost savings. All these things can allow you to do more capital projects, but you need to play within the rules of your particular statute. At the end of the day, like I said, you play within these constraints in order to maximize the funding. So you can leverage the guaranteed savings. You can leverage things like utility rebates, the ITC or IRA that Doug just walked us through, and you can leverage capital dollars that you have available to pay for these projects and capture savings to do more and get that compounding effect. So I'm going to walk you through a couple projects here. This is the result of an investment grade audit. Now I rounded off some of the numbers here to keep things simple, but this is generally what you might see after an ESCO has done an investment grade audit of your facilities. There's ECMs, or energy conservation measures, ranging from very quick paybacks, like the retro commissioning, all the way to much longer paybacks, like a boiler upgrade. Unfortunately, when you do the financing analysis on the right over here, and you start looking at what the annual savings are versus the total investment of the project, the annual savings do not fund the annual debt payments of the project, and you have a negative net cash flow to the project of about $600,000. As a result, you need to start picking and choosing what equipment can actually, what ECMs you want to build into the project. So as we go through this, this is a project, fully self-funding project with no additional funds being added. You have all of the quote unquote low-hanging fruit in the project: retro commissioning, building envelope, water conservation, LEDs, solar PV arrays. And unfortunately, in order to keep this project self-funding, you don't get this higher capital need equipment, the pneumatic to DDC controls, chiller upgrades, boiler upgrades. These are things that are most likely at the end of their useful life that need to be paid for one way or the other. So when you see this project, again, when I say the term self-funding, what I mean is annual savings paying for the annual debt payment. And in this project, when you remove all this heavy, expensive capital equipment, the project cash flows very, very easily. But the school district in this case was going to be left with all of this same old, antiquated equipment. So they wanted to leverage funds to do as much as possible. So they looked to their ESCO and said, what are the rebates available, right? So you can see here in this column, adding in rebates for retro commissioning, LED upgrades, and the pneumatic DDC upgrades were eligible for a combined about $2.5 million in funds. So now when you go to the cash flow analysis, you can see that you have your total project of about $22 million. You have your additional funding buying that net finance amount down to just under 20 million. And down here at the bottom right, you can see your net cash flow. Now you have your guaranteed savings less your debt payment for a positive cash flow of about $30,000 a year. So I mentioned rebates. It's a very obvious example, but I want to make the point that rely on your ESCOs. They know your market. They do this day in and day out. And I've seen many, many ESPC projects and utility rebate programs actually incentivize owners to do more comprehensive projects, so that if you do just lighting, you might get X dollars back. But if you do lighting and temperature controls, you might get 3X back, because they want you to do more and more deep retrofits. So when we talk about leveraging, really in blue here at the bottom right, this hammers home the point. In this example, they captured $2.5 million in rebates, invested that into the project, and as a result, funded $5.5 million worth of capital upgrades that otherwise wouldn't have been done in the project. Now, to take this a step further, you look at your solar PV opportunity. We all know about the ITC, the IRA benefit or direct pay benefit that Doug just covered. The customer wanted to explore that as a potential opportunity. So when you start to model that in, you add in, let's say, a 30%, just to be very conservative and simple here. By adding in that $750,000 additional benefit into the project, they're able to now fund the chiller upgrades that before weren't going to be funded because it doesn't cash flow. So again, $750,000 is being added to the project benefits. And as a result, you're able to fund almost double that, of about $1.25 million worth of chiller upgrades, all while maintaining the net positive cash flow of the project. Still, though, this customer, their boiler was probably the picture in the first slide I showed you there in black and white. They had about $5 million worth of boiler upgrades that they had to get done. You know, it was based in the Northeast, equipment at the end of its useful life, concerned about just heating the building going forward in the next couple winters. So they actually had capital dollars available to them as part of a bond that in their specific jurisdiction, they were able to contribute capital dollars to help buy down the net financed amount and get more with the project. So in this case, they had about $4.25 million. They inserted that into the project, financed the balance, and as a result, were able to fund that full $5 million worth of boiler upgrades, again, while maintaining that net positive cash flow. So I mentioned the ESPC statutes in the beginning. Make sure you understand what's allowed, what's not allowed. This isn't the case for every single client, but if it is, it's a great opportunity to use your capital dollars, do this work, generate guaranteed savings, and use those savings now to fund more and more comprehensive projects. So Tim mentioned in his opening remarks the Oak Ridge National Labs study that they did on the leveraging ratio. I included a link here, and I do think we're going to be able to make these slides available to you for easy access. But in that report, if you read it, and really I developed this presentation to present those concepts in layman's terms, is that it talks about this leveraging ratio where it's a comparison of total amount of new investment or new project that's added versus the funds contributed. And these lines down here, D and E, kind of drive that point home to show that as you add, in the case of when you added $2.5 million worth of rebates, they were able to fund another $5.5 million worth of capital upgrades. With the ITC, again, adding $3.25 million total resulted in $6.7 million in additional upgrades. That study, if you go and read through it, it talks about leveraging ratios generally from 1.3 to 2.1. In some cases, that leveraging ratio can actually increase depending on what you're putting those dollars into, what your interest rates are. There's a lot of moving parts in the math. But what this really means when you boil it down, is that for every single dollar leveraged, or every capital dollar you put in, every rebate dollar you capture in the project, you're able to fund 1.3 to 2.1x of that dollar. So $1 million equals $2 million worth of upgrades. So it's a fantastic model to demonstrate to your taxpayers that you're using this kind of innovative funding mechanism to do more with the same amount of money without going out and asking them for more money via bond referendums or whatever it may be. So I'm just going to wrap up here with a few recommendations for next steps. I've heard many owners, I've heard many ESCOs. I mean, we've had our own difficulties working with customers in that you need to dial in exactly what funding sources you're going to pursue to make sure that you have an efficient scope development and project development process. What Doug just went through, there's never been more funding sources available to do these projects, and it can almost become a paralysis by analysis situation. So you want to be efficient, hone in on exactly what your opportunities are, and go and develop a project that's consistent with the potential scope that could be funded from those funding opportunities. The other part, we talked about bridge financing, and I don't want to steal too much of Ben's thunder coming up here, but as an owner's rep, what we're constantly advocating customers understand is the alignment of project benefits with project costs. So the realization of energy savings, the realization of rebates arriving, the ITC payment when that comes after you've installed it, after you've installed the solar array, that can all be aligned with your future payments on the project, i.e. your debt payments or M&V service payments or things like that. You just need to make sure that you're being diligent and accurate so that when that bill shows up, that invoice shows up in your inbox, you have the funds secured in your budget from energy savings or from the external funding sources to make that payment. It's key to the success of these projects. And what we walked through today is really the result of a 12+ month effort with this school district. We started working with them years ago to help them plan the project, build their team, figure out who's going to be working on it, who their stakeholders are, present it to stakeholders. We helped them procure the ESCO partner. We oversaw the investment grade audit, and finally once we went through this process, they still had to go secure financing, execute contracts with legal. That whole thing can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. So there's a tremendous amount of work to get to that. My construction colleagues laugh when I call it the finish line because they're really just starting to build the project at that point. But getting to this point is a tremendous amount of work to get there. So it's who of you to get started as soon as possible. Because in the meantime, you still have that old existing equipment that's limping along, and there's energy savings to be had in your facilities as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Laura here, and happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aldo. And yes, we will share these slides and the recording after today's presentation. I think seeing those tables that you presented and really being able to kind of walk through all the addition and subtraction will be very helpful for folks.
Absolutely.
So now I'd like to invite Ben to give us an overview of like how the capital market is responding to these BIL and IRA opportunities, especially considering that as Doug and Aldo both mentioned, that the elective pay tax credits are only realized after a project is placed into service. So I'd love to hear from you, Ben, what some key considerations are for public entities that are looking to take advantage of these opportunities.
Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you great.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so thank you, Laura. Thank you to my fellow panelists. Yeah, so there's been a lot of concepts discussed, and I think it's fitting to sort of at the end of this presentation to talk about what we're seeing from a perspective as a lender in the marketplace and how the ITC, and I actually want to throw in rebates because I think it's a unique concept too, because in some ways they're very similar. And to really build on what Aldo just said, you know, you take a project as he has shown, and whether it's the ITC or a rebate, you know, those payments are coming in the future, right? Whether they're 12 months or 24 months after completion, those amounts will show up at some point. And the question is, you know, how do you factor that into your structured finance at some point? And, you know, many times when we're asked this question, you know, one, I'd say in the front end, the project upon financial closing is 100% financed. So, you know, that $28 million project, although it may have, you know, X amount of dollars coming in for rebates and an ITC, you need all the money up front, right? The ESCO needs all the money up front to pay for the ECMs going in. And so, you know, when we close a project, we're going to close 100%. What's being asked now is because of how the ITC works, let's build in that payment, that amount to come in to the amortization at a date specific. So that could be, you know, whether it's 12 months into the project or 16 months after completion, those dollars are anticipated to come in, and we'll simply build that in to the payment schedule, right? And obviously what that does is reduces the principal and interest going forward. I know there's been, you know, some conversations about bridge financing. I mean, I look at bridge financing in a couple of ways. I think one is bridge financing, you know, to me tells me that there is some amount of money that's needed in the beginning to cover the project cost while waiting on the ITC to come in, and then potentially the project's paid off in full, right? So for me, when I hear bridge, I think of really short term. You know, that's if a project's being paid for in cash at some point down in the future. Where we're seeing the discussion about ITC and we're building it into projects now, they're typically bundled, right? It's like what Aldo showed. It's a bundling of ECM. So even though there's an ITC payment coming in for the bulk of the technologies, there's still a payback that's over a period of, you know, 10, 15, 20 years. And so that ITC payment is being accounted for as reducing the principal and interest over the term. And there's a couple ways we look at it. One, we build it in direct, right? You've made an estimation of what you think it is. We build that in and say, okay, on this date we expect that to be paid, or we don't build it in, right? And we have a discussion about when it does come in, how to apply it. And so, you know, we have the ability to be flexible in that way. Also, I'll mention, you know, the 179D, not spend a lot of time on this, but because of its increase, I have seen more focus on how the 179D component fits into projects as well. Now, because it's typically assigned, it's not gonna factor in like an ITC payment where it's a direct pay down of the amortization. But where I have seen it is that we have reduced the financing amount of the project by the 179D that's anticipated, and that has changed. That's, you know, it doesn't happen all the time, but we do see it every so often when that is factoring in now as part of the project and the reduced project cost. beyond that, I think, it's, as a lender, looking, there was a question that I saw that popped in about risk and about risk capital. Ultimately, I think that's a conversation between, it's kind of the lender, the ESCO, and the public sector client about what is the risk, right? Where is the risk going to lie? Typically, most lenders are not going to take that risk of the payment coming in or payments are not coming in. That's going to have to be a discussion about how you factor in the payment and the expectation of that payment coming in. With that, Laura, I know we're going to open this up for questions. I will turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you so much. We have had a few questions come in. So one question that we received, and Aldo or Doug, perhaps you could handle this one. And feel free to all come on camera, guys, because I'll just be shooting questions at each of you. So the first question here is, can the ITC's direct pay benefit be used for geothermal systems and battery microgrids? I think your example had like a solar one, Aldo.
It did. I kept the solar one because it's probably the most recognizable, kind of straightforward one, and a little bit less of the unknown element to it also. But that same concept applies for geothermal, ground source heat pump upgrades, batteries, microgrids as well. Now there's a little, and Doug or Tim, maybe you can jump in, but like there's a little lack of clarity on exactly how much of what percent of what is going to be reimbursed ultimately. But as that gets dialed in and knowing those answers, this same concept of leveraging can be used, where geothermal and batteries, which historically really haven't like penciled in these jobs, they've been in that long payback category. They historically haven't been included in performance contracts, but with this direct pay, it's going to kind of change that calculus pretty significantly.
Yeah, not a whole lot to add. You said it well, Aldo. So microgrid controllers are eligible through 2020, the end of this year for sure, or at least to begin construction. GHP, yeah, there is some uncertainty around exactly where you draw the boundaries of that cost basis for eligibility. But maybe if others wanted to chime in, but that's probably enough for this answer.
So I think there was a geothermal question as part of your piece there. Ground source heat pumps do qualify for the tax credit. I think batteries, if they're combined with solar now, can combine. But Doug, remind me, when does the tax credit transition to the clean energy tax credit? Is that the end of this year?
It's the end of this year, so
Right.
I glossed over it to keep things simpler, but in the tax code, there's currently a prescribed list of technologies that are eligible for the ITC. After the end of this year, it's going to become a technology agnostic clean ITC is how it's phrased, and clean, zero emitting technologies will be considered eligible for the ITC, regardless of whether they're on a specific list. And it remains to see how that actually gets implemented by the IRS, but it will be a bit broader after the end of this year than as it's currently defined.
It is broader, but it does remove certain things that are more efficiency related, like the ground source heat pump option would go away. You have to have something that generates power. It's unclear. Batteries we think will be included, but solar and wind would definitely be in that, but it's unclear beyond that.
Yeah, so things like CHP is a good example where right now CHP is a eligible ITC technology, but it's unclear whether that's going to be includable in the new clean ITC unless there's carbon capture associated with it, which obviously is much more costly and less available commercially. And same for microgrid controllers. That technology is eligible for the ITC this year, but the clean ITC, it's not in the specific BIL language. so it's not clear that it would be available.
Doug, perhaps you can address this one. We also had a question about how to maximize incentives for social equity and environmental justice in local communities.
That's a great question and a challenging one. So, you know, a lot of those resources that we covered in my section are a great place to start. I'll also draw your attention particularly to a couple of the ITC bonus adder programs that are explicitly focused on low-income communities. There is a IRS and DOE webpage outlining these incentives in more detail, but they represent a 10 to 20% increase in the ITC benefit and are explicitly for projects that benefit these types of communities. They can be for covered housing programs, they can be for low-income community solar projects, or they can be located in, you know, persistent poverty or new market tax credit areas. So there's a variety of different ways to qualify for them. They do require pre-application, and the available capacity is limited to 1.8 gigawatts per year. So it is a little bit more constrained and structured of a process than applying for some of the other tax credit adders that you would just do at normal tax filing. And I'll share that link to the low-income communities page in the chat for everyone.
Great, thank you so much. Tim, I see that you are kind of live answering a question about 179D tax credit, and I was wondering if you could speak to that.
I can. So the question was about, is there a common opinion about 179D with NASCO members? It's really all over the board. I mean, there are some members that will work and provide some benefit to the client. There are some members who keep it all themselves. There are some members who don't have the ability to offer it. 179D is an interesting one, is that it's not a tax credit, it's a tax deduction. So that means that if you have a 1 million square foot school district, for example, and you get a $5 tax deduction, you have to have $5 million of profit in order to get a deduction that makes that worthwhile. And that's a lot of profit. And it may be challenging. So you may have only one school district in your entire year you can offer that to, or you may not even be able to offer that at all. It just depends on where you stand. It also is challenging that it depends on the overall budget internal to the energy service company on how you can offer that. So there is no standard methodology, and each one has to approach each one individually and each project individually.
If I could just add on to what Tim said, he made a really good point that I should have in my presentation, that the investment tax credit is a dollar for dollar reduction of your tax liability. So if you got a $100,000 tax credit, you got $100,000 of direct pay. In the context of 179D, which is a deduction, it's actually multiplied by your tax rate. So that $5 of deduction is probably like a dollar of tax benefit on your ultimate tax filing. So really important that, you know, the 179D, that $5 is actually reduced by your tax rate.
And on the 179D vein here, we have another question about, can you have multiple projects availing of 179D with different contractors? So multiple projects with different contractors, each of them using 179D.
Remember, 179D is for the designer of the lighting. And so I suspect if you have different contractors, that means you have different contracts, and each contract has a scope of work and it has identified designer. Under that circumstance, the answer would be yes. Each designer could then do the application for what they thought was appropriate.
Okay, we also have a question about can improving indoor air quality be done in conjunction with energy savings projects, and what would be the best source of funding to support indoor air quality improvements? Aldo, can you want to tackle that first?
Yeah, you know, indoor air quality became a major topic during, it's always been for many engineers, right? The mechanical engineers in the room, but when it comes to COVID, shined a bright light on the indoor air quality conditions in some of these schools and different, government buildings. So it became a hot topic for performance contracts, and suddenly indoor air quality became one of those sexy measures that people were excited about, the way solar or other things might be. So performance contracting, if you're guaranteeing energy savings, you need to control the temperature in the space, and you also need to control the humidity in the space, which is the definition of indoor air quality. So maintaining that comfort zone during occupied periods is exactly what performance contracts do. And then during that unoccupied period, allowing it to drift out of it and have it ready for when the occupants come back in. In terms of a funding source, rebates are always available for HVAC and, those types of upgrades. But in my experience, these are the capital intensive upgrades that have long paybacks, so if your entity or your agency is eligible to do capital contribution, by far that is the best way to fund, those upgrades. Use that finance to balance, capture savings from the low hanging fruit, and you're just able to do that much more in the project than you would if you just went out and did the HVAC dehumidification project with only that capital money, if that makes sense. You want to capture that leveraging ratio.
Thank you. I think just to round us out, the last question, and I will put it to all of you to feel free to chime in on this one, but and although you kind of talked about it with the decision paralysis comment that you made, but you have all these different opportunities, there's all these funding sources to consider. Why bother trying to combine them all together, make this lengthy effort to have a comprehensive project? Why not just take the funds that I have right now and use them to implement it on ECM, and then keep the energy savings from that I'm able to achieve from implementing a project right away with the funds I have on hand or have from my grant that I just received from DOE, for example? Go for it, Tim.
So I'm going to jump in, Aldo, and this whole webinar is about ESPC campaign, and your goal is to gain measured and verified savings. One of the reasons that we really see the ESCO model as a successful one is that complete partnering that is done between the ESCO and the client. The ESCO will go dig into all these different tax credits, the 179D, the utility rebates, maybe state rebates, and find out what is the best mix of funding that you can get. They'll ask you about your capital program, and they'll design a project that is overall the best one with the money that you have, the money you can get, and the savings that's available, and make that all work. And they'll do that all for the client as part of the investment grade audit. And then they'll guarantee the savings. And that's where you come in, Laura, with your campaign, is to take those guaranteed savings to show the results. I was recently on a call with some government clients, and they were really emphasis that this is guaranteed savings. So we know we're going to get the savings versus other projects we put in. We may never know if we get the savings or not, because once we're done, we walk away from it and never look back again. So that's what this call is about. That's why we're here, is we want to measure and verify these savings so we can know the projects perform. And that's what the ESCOs do. They make a project that fits you and performs for you.
Thank you so much, Tim. I don't think I could have concluded any better myself. We are at time. So with that, I just want to say once again to all of our presenters, thank you so much for being with us here today. Really appreciate all of your presentations, and thank you to everybody who tuned in. And we will get those slides and the recording out to you as soon as we are able. Have a great day.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Bye.